morning, everybody. I wanted to start with a clip from the film Valley Girl by Martha. It was directed by Martha Coolidge in 1982, and the scene that we're going to be looking at is called "Slum Away from Home." It's I don't know. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah, I
it's where it disappeared to. We were playing it with the meeting. Well, why don't you talk and I'll look. So once we get the clip set up, what we're going to see is basically a scene of 4 young teens who have all ventured into Hollywood together, and the anarchistic rock and roll Randy and his best friend have crashed a party in the Valley and have persuaded Julie and her best friend Stacy to join them on a trip into Hollywood to go to a club and experience the Hollywood lifestyle from a different perspective. I think that's a scene. Yeah. Sorry, but we have a little extra time. Okay, here we go. This was actually, for those of you familiar with Los Angeles, this scene is actually filmed in what is today the Biker Room on Sunset Boulevard. Can you guys all hear what the discourse? Okay, a little. So they're arguing basically about musical styles, where they shop, what kind of clothes they buy. Uh-oh, Stacy's worried. The connection is being made. All right. So I grew up with the teen films of the 1980s. My teen years were strongly influenced by the films that I managed to sneak into theaters to see or watch on our brand new HBO channel at home. I'd love to say that I have distinct memories of my first viewing of these films, but in actuality I don't. What I do recall is that they instantly became a naturalized part of my teen identity formation and pop culture arsenal, and I hardly noticed. So in the scene that we just viewed, Randy and Julie, the principal characters, are based loosely on Romeo and Juliet, are on their first date together along with their best friends. Unlike Romeo and Juliet, however, whose love was threatened by a long-standing family feuds beyond their control, Randy and Julie's relationship is threatened by the modern social pressures that prescribe identities and strict dichotomies of insider, outsider, totally awesome, or grody to the max. To this end, the four teens discuss the relatively common identity markers of social status that superficially divide them: fashion, music, hangouts, and hang-ups. But this is not your typical teen scene in early 1980s American cinema. The central character, Julie, a totally awesome valley girl, who by the end of this scene begins a cathartic exploration of her conflicted role in the social and political economies of American youth culture. This catharsis is facilitated by the romantic relationship she begins with anarchistic Randy, who encourages her to reject capitalistic norms of consumer culture and engage in alternative subcultures to explore her unique identity. Pretty heavy stuff for a light romantic comedy. The 1980s was a prolific era for the coming-of-age teen movie, which was marked by radical transitions in social, cultural, and political attitudes. The baby boomers' babies were just coming into their own, often rejecting the counterculture and mass political movements of their parents for a deeper examination of personal politics of everyday life, identity formation, gender, and sexuality, that call into question broader systems of social organization and control. Thus, teen films from this era demonstrate a more self-conscious and self-reflexive interest in the role of friendship in small communities. Since teenagers were not authors of their own commercial films in the 1980s, the filmmakers who make teen movies become a central object of scholarship, and many of those filmmakers happen to be women who were also challenging the male-dominated film industries. Feminist film scholarship has made significant contributions to cinema histories by addressing the male-dominated industry of production, and yet many feminist film scholars have devalued teen films as, quote, flagrantly commercial, truly standardized products with their only aim at capturing the kid market at the malls, or that women directors are merely pigeonholed into directing teen flicks with little aesthetic or cultural value. It would appear that women making teen films are marginalized within feminist film histories, as well as dominant film histories, which exposes contradictions in the historicization of the genre and the politics of gender difference among producers of films aimed at teen audiences. So this paper presents an historical corrective to existing scholarship on the American teen film by examining a brief period in the early 1980s when four directors challenged the male-dominated Hollywood production of the teen film genre. Between 1981 and 1983, Amy Heckerling, Martha Coolidge, Penelope Spheris, and Susan Seidelman produced a few of the most important and radical teen films of the era: Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Valley Girl, Smithereens, and Suburbia. I argue that these directors and their films subvert previous generic conventions, engaging in visual and narrative critiques of dominant cultural representation, while simultaneously providing viable avenues of production for women in film. The cinema of minors is a useful heuristic to interrogate the intersection of production and representation in teen movies. Drawing from Alison Butler's notion of minor cinema, the cinema of minors provides a broader theoretical and historical framework with which women filmmakers working in, on the margins, or outside Hollywood can be recognized collectively in relation to feminist film objectives. This intervention seeks to redress gender bias extant in dominant cinema histories, which often excludes or marginalizes women filmmakers, but it also calls into question frameworks for critique in feminist film histories, which have largely failed to recognize the teen film as a productive site for progressive cinematic texts to emerge. I situate each of these texts and directors squarely at the vanguard of contemporary teen cinema, revising theories and recuperating histories in the scholarship of youth cinema and women's cinema into a cinema of minors. Many feminist film historians do note the popularity of Heckerling's Fast Times at Ridgemont High or Coolidge's successful indie hit Valley Girl. Both films were commercial box office successes. But Spirus's gritty gutter punk teen drama, Suburbia, rarely gets a mention, particularly passed over in light of her commercial success with Wayne's World in 1992. And Susan Seidelman's original East Village rocker chick was not Madonna in Desperately Seeking Susan, but rather the ambitious but failing musician Wren in Smithereens. What many cinema historians argue is merely a teen trap for studio dollars. For Heckerling, Coolidge, Seidelman, and Spirus, the teen film was deployed as a productive means to critique dominant ideologies, narratives, and positions in and on the margins of commercial Hollywood cinema, establishing themselves as viable contenders for the male-dominated director's chair. Feminist film scholar Allison Butler, in her book Women's Cinema, The Contested Screen, argues for a new rubric of categorization that addresses the plurality of films made by women, while also addressing the often criticized notion that a film made by a woman is generically a woman's film. Butler asserts the plurality of forms, concerns, and constituencies in contemporary women's cinema now exceeds even the most flexible definition of counter-cinema. She calls instead for a minor cinema that creates a wider umbrella under which women, feminist and self-proclaimed non-feminist filmmakers and producers and techs can be recognized in the collective while still marking difference in gendered production representation and reception. Butler continues, the idea of the minor comes from Deleuze and Guattari's concept of minor literature, which is the literature of a minority or marginalized group written not in a minor language, but in a major one. So minor cinema does not appeal to established models. It produces what is not already recognizable. It does not just add one more work to the great tradition. It disrupts and dislocates that tradition. Thus, the films and producers of these teen dramas engage in a minor cinema that dislocates the generic tradition of the teen genre. Film scholar Christina Lane, in her book Feminist Hollywood, argues that genre and authorship intersect at a crucial point because they suggest one way in which an individual, if given the opportunity, might make a mark on a highly commercial system by understanding its conventions and formulas well enough to manipulate them. The example shown here is of Coolidge's Valley Girl, which shows contemporary teens of the 1980s who define themselves through daily activities and interpersonal relationships that reflect late modernity of transition, instability, fluidity, and fragmentation, rather than investment in static identity inherited from fixed traditions. In short, adolescence is the time of becoming. The cinema of minors contextualizes the postmodern nature of mutable and transient identity defined by choice. Just as minor cinema refutes the privileged status of a majoritarian universal, it celebrates and exploits modes of becoming and difference based on generative states of transformation. It is the vehicle for the creation of identities rather than the expression of them. What is unique to the cinema of minors is that it is made accessible to young viewers. It is directed at them. In the case of the films examined here, it is explicitly addressed to young women. For example, through the camera work, Coolidge positions Julie as a feminine subject of desire rather than the object, and uses visual and narrative devices to critique male bravado with the centralization of adolescent female subjectivities. Coolidge's cinematography reveals the female subjectivities inherent in her work and the means by which she has developed ways of critiquing Hollywood from within. I argue that this is one premier example of minor cinema resonant with popular culture appeal, particularly for young audiences, and a compelling illustration of what the cinema of minors can be. Women's status as filmmakers has inarguably been a position of minor working within, on the margins, or in direct opposition to major film industries, which is further reproduced in canonical film histories. The teen film has rarely been situated as a dominant genre of status and power for filmmakers, which may be why so many women have directed feature films aimed at a youth audience. And yet, these films are often highly successful and attain the status of cult classic, as is the case for Valley Girl, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Smithereens, and Suburbia. The goal here is to resituate women filmmakers in both discursive production of histories and filmmaking while establishing the vital cultural role of mainstream and independent cinema of minors.